Let's talk about three things that I think you need to consider if you are being sued or threatened to be sued over a vehicle deficiency. So, what I mean by that is you buy a vehicle, it gets repossessed and then sold, and then they say you still owe money, so now they're suing you or threatening to sue you. These would be companies like Velocity, Cascade Capital, AutoVest. There's a whole host of these companies that are these debt buyer companies. They claim to buy the debt, and now they're coming after you for a deficiency. So let me tell you the three things real quick, and then we'll go through, just spend a minute or so on each one. And if you have interest in this and want me to do follow-up videos, I'm happy to do that. So number one, what happened leading up to the time of repossession? In other words, how did we go from we're so happy to buy this car to now my car is repossessed? Something happened there. What was it? Number two, just focusing in on the actual repossession. What happened? Did you voluntarily turn it in? Did somebody take it out of your garage? What happened in the actual repossession? Then number three, after the repossession. So we have the repossession and then we have the sale. Before the sale, you're supposed to be sent a letter that says, hey, we have your car. We're going to sell it. And then afterwards, hey, we sold your car. Now here's how much you owe. Did you get those letters? So let me walk you through these. So I'm sure there's a case where somebody says, oh, it was a great car, no problems. I just couldn't afford it anymore, and so it was repossessed. I mean, that I'm sure happens. I haven't seen that, but I'm sure it happens. But for most people, I'm going to say 95% of the people I've ever dealt with, I say, what happened between when you bought the car to the repossession? They say, oh, well, 2 months in or 6 months in or a year in, the transmission falls apart or the engine blows up or I discover there was such terrible frame damage, whatever it is. And I couldn't afford to fix the car, or I could afford to try and keep the car running, but I couldn't afford to make the payment. I can't do both. I had to choose. And so the reason I bring this up is it may be that if you bought the car from a dealership, and almost always the dealership is listed as the seller, okay, and then they say assign the loan to some finance company who then, usually after the repossession, sells that deficiency to Cascade or Velocity or AutoVest or XYZ, auto loan debt buyer company. Usually in that scenario, if you have some valid defenses against that dealership or some claims against that dealership or the finance company, you can assert those against the debt buyer, the company that claims to have bought your debt. Because when they buy that piece of paper, in a large extent of the time, they are buying the defenses and the claims. Now, a lot of times you can't get over what you owe, but let's say that they claim you owe $10,000. Well, if you have $10,000 worth of counterclaims or defenses, then that may be as an offset, bring the amount you owe actually to zero. Okay. Now, you may not be able to get money against that debt buyer for something the dealership did, but you at least have the opportunity to wipe out the debt buyer's claim. And so that's why I say, number one, focus on what happened between the time you bought the car until the repossession happened. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is let's zero in on that repossession. Well, why? Well, because if there's a breach of the peace, and that's sort of a special terminology with repossession, breach of the peace. It means they did something illegal in the repossession of that vehicle, and now you would have a claim against the repo person, and if there's a company above the repo person, and then whoever hired that repo person. Now, sometimes you have a finance company who hires a regional firm, who hires a local firm, who then hires the specific repo man. Well, if you have claims against those, you may be able to bring those claims against the debt buyer as a counterclaim or what's called a set-off. Okay, so again, they say you owe $10,000. You may say, well, look, actually, you owe me more than that, which would bring it to zero. And so what are examples of a breach of the peace? And I'm happy if there's interest in doing more videos on this, getting into the details, but let me give you some examples. So my car is in my garage, and I don't care if the garage door is locked or not locked. Repo man comes by 2 in the morning. He looks in, sees my car in there, raises the garage door, tows the car. It's a breach of the peace because he's opening doors. He's sort of violating the sanctity of my home here to get to that vehicle. Well, what would be another example? Let's say that I'm walking out from my office and I see him there hooking up my car, and I go, wait, stop. You can't take my car. He goes, man, we're taking your car. It's too late. We already hooked it up. I'm like, stop taking my car. And he's like, forget you, and takes my car. That's a breach of the peace. What if he's yelling at me? What if he's cursing at me? That can be a breach of the peace. What if I'm sitting in the car and he's like, we don't care. We'll tow it with you sitting in there. That's definitely a breach of the peace. What if he, hits me or takes a swing at me or pulls a gun, or all of that's a breach of the peace, okay? Basically, if the consumer says stop, the repo man should stop, okay? Now, maybe there's some slight, 1 in a million hypothetical that we could come up with where it would not be a breach of peace. But basically, if the consumer says stop, get away from my car, then they better do that. And if they're like opening gates, they're tearing up your yard, they are opening a garage door, they are, yelling at you, scaring you, whatever, that's going to be a breach of peace. So it would be helpful to know that, because first you might be able to, there might still be time to sue that repo guy. But number two, it may be that counterclaim or that offset to the supposed deficiency that you owe the debt buyer. So that's why I say, number one, focus on what happened from the time you bought the car to the repossession. And then let's focus on that repossession. And then the last thing is the time period from the repossession until after the sale. Okay, so normally they repossess it, and then it goes to some yard where it's kept, and then it's sold in a private sale or a public sale. So let me do it this way. Here's the repossession. Here's the sale. You should receive a letter after the repo, but before the sale, that says, hey, we have your car and we're planning on selling it. Sometimes they'll give you a specific date. Sometimes they'll say on or after this date at a public or private sale, whatever. They have to tell you before the sale that they are going to sell your vehicle and give you the opportunity to be able to redeem that vehicle. Well, what about after the sale? So again, you owe $20,000. The car brings $9,000. So they say, hey, you owe us 11 grand. Well, after the sale, they have a limited period of time to send you a letter that says, hey, we sold your car. So remember, the first letter is sort of looking forward in time saying, we're going to sell your car. The second letter is looking back in the past saying, we did sell your car. Here's the breakdown. Here's how much you owe. This may sound silly, but sometimes these people can't even do the math right. And they know this. They know their system is sort of messed up on the math. And so do the math very carefully. Don't just say, well, it looks like it's sort of neatly organized. It must be correct. No, test it. Check it out. We have seen these letters that they will say, let's just say the letter's dated June 1st. And it'll say, we sold your vehicle on July 10th. Really? you can time travel apparently, because here we are June 1st, and now you're telling me 6 weeks in the future you sold my car, and you know what you got for it 6 weeks. Now they go, oh, well, it's just typo. Well, I mean, if you can't even get the date right, what else is not right? Okay. So really scrutinize those letters. Okay. And look through your file. Did you get those letters? Sometimes they'll attach them to the lawsuit. You may say, I've never seen this letter. Or what you may find is they've recreated these letters, okay? And they're just trying to basically commit fraud on the court. So let me give you an example. So I have a car that's repossessed, and at the time it was repossessed, I lived at 123 Main Street. And then 2 years after the repossession, I moved to 789, First Avenue. Okay. And so I say, hey, I didn't get a letter from you. And they go, oh, here's a letter. And it's written to me and it's dated back here at the time of the repossession sale, slightly before it and then slightly after it. But the address they have is 789 First Avenue. Well, I didn't live there until 2 years after the repo, after the sale. How did that get in there? Well, they created this document after the fact. So that's why I'm saying scrutinize these documents, really, really study them, compare them, see if these look right. We've seen them where the wrong company will send the letter, okay? And it's a company that says, oh, we bought the debt, but somehow they sent letters to me before they bought the debt. That doesn't make any sense. And so really check those out because, again, if there's a problem with the letters, depending on your state law, it may be what's called an absolute bar to any deficiency. It may be what's called a rebuttable presumption, or it can be an offset. There's all different approaches here. But the starting point, and what I really want to just focus on in this video, is look at from when you bought the car to the repossession. What happened? What's the story there? Why did we let the car get repossessed? Usually it's because it was a lousy car, and that may give us some options. Now zero in on that repossession. What happened in the repossession? Now maybe we just voluntarily turned it into a dealership. Okay, well there's no breach of peace there. But a lot of times there's a breach of the peace, and that can be very helpful in this. So we have, you buy the car to the repo, look at the repo. Now after the repo, look at, did you get a letter before the sale? And then did you get a letter after the sale? And look at those letters. Is it the right company? They have the right address, the right dates? Do they have the right math, the right amount? Okay, all those things can help you when you're defending against one of these what are called deficiency actions. Sometimes brought by the original creditors, usually brought though by a debt buyer. So hope that that's helpful to you, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Okay, bye-bye.